Welcome to another episode of Business Builders Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Stannis. Today's episode focuses on paid social media advertising. So whether you're already a seasoned pro or just starting your first campaign, we'll cover some ideas and tips to help you get the most out of your ROI. But first, let's meet today's guest, Robert Wetzel. He's the Director of Marketing and Communications for TLC Marketing and Creative Services. Robert, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back. I guess we did good the first time.
Yeah, right. So for those who actually missed it, you can check out our previous episode that we collaborated together with on event marketing. So before we jump into kind of all of the specifics of the episode, let's really take a step back and kind of analyze the topic that we're talking about today, which is paid social media advertising. I think a lot of people kind of have a misconception and aren't as educated on what the difference is between actually just regularly posting on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, whatever it is, versus actually taking money from their marketing budget, allocating a dollar amount towards the platform that they're trying to utilize, and then actually spend it on a specific campaign. So if you want to kind of break down the difference,
Yeah, absolutely.
and really kind of set ourselves up for the rest of the episode.
Absolutely. So the way that we like to discuss it with clients is break it into two different ideas. On one side, you have your organic posting, which is your content that you create. Maybe you post every day, maybe you post 2 to 3 times a week, whatever that may be. And that's getting specifically to the people who follow you and the people that they share it with. And we like to think of that as more of like a branding tool. It's a good landing page or good resource for information. People stay up to date with what's going on in your business. But on the paid side, we're looking at advertising. And this would be traditionally what before was an ad in a magazine or an ad in a newspaper or on TV. That's what we're looking for. We're trying to expand our reach. We're trying to get away from the people who only follow our page or who they share it with. We're trying to find new individuals. And one of the functions that advertising on social media has, I'll say Facebook because that's usually the most common one, is the targeting functions. And with that, you have a lot of opportunity to specifically reach the people that you would like to. Either they're maybe past customers, maybe they're previous visitors of the website, maybe they have an interest that aligns with your company or your service, your brand, and that I definitely would like to jump into more of that.
So would you say kind of discovering that new audience is probably the biggest advantage of utilizing paid social media advertising?
I think the biggest advantage of using paid social media advertising is the fact that you can work with any budget. And that's one of the things that I like to push is there's no set dollar amount. No marketing plan is one size fits all, but there's no set dollar amount that you need to go into Facebook. So if you come in and you say, I have $500, or if you come in and you say, I have $5,000, one is not unusable. $500 doesn't mean you don't have enough, or $5,000 doesn't mean you have too much. It all depends on what your goals are. The amount of money that you put into it is sometimes going to affect the results that you achieve. So it's a lot of trial and error, and you have to start somewhere.
And I think, that's a perfect example because I think for the longest time, people had a budget. They say, well, I don't have enough to do whatever it is I want to do, right? So let's say they want to do radio ads or they want to do TV ads. Right. I don't have enough in my budget. So basically what you're saying is with social media, there is no right or wrong budget because, like you said, you can allocate whatever you want to it.
Correct. And there's a point of testing involved. So what we suggest is you start with what you're comfortable with depending on how you break down your marketing budget. And then you test. You test creative, you test campaigns, you test different ad sets, you see what works, and you look at your numbers. And for example, if you're trying to drive conversions and you have $500 to spend, after you run that campaign over that period of time, look at your numbers and say, okay, well, I spent $500 and I got 3 conversions. And you ask yourself, okay, well, is that enough? What was my profit margin on the $500 that I spent with the 3 conversions that I got? And then that can help you adjust your budget for future campaigns based off the numbers.
So let's kind of break that down a little bit. You're talking about basically taking the data that you get from the platform, analyzing it, realizing, okay, did I make my ROI? Did I not? Why did I not? How can I kind of build upon that? Right? Correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a key factor. You don't want to just throw money and just let it be forever. Some of the key things would be paying attention to those metrics, like looking at your click-through rate, looking at your frequency, looking at all these different things that help you understand what is the consumer thinking when they see my ad. And a big factor in ads is your creative. So you need to make sure that you're looking at your creative. And for example, when you build a campaign, it breaks down into 3 levels. So you have your campaign at the top, then you have your ad set, and then you have your ads. Now, you can run multiple forms of creative in your ad set or in your campaign as a whole.
So when you say creative, we're talking about the images that you're showing,
Images,
or the video.
videos.
Is there one that you would recommend over the other?
It depends on what you're doing. For the most part, generally speaking, video always gets more traction just because it's more engaging. But sometimes a good old flyer does the trick depending on what you're trying to do. One of the things that we've noticed is when we were doing a campaign for a product and we were doing a discount, it was a special, we would just have a flyer with an image of the product and a discount code, and that worked so much better than other things because people knew exactly what it was right away. They saw the image, they saw the discount, and that was kind of their driving factor to go from Facebook to their website and check out. So that's one way to look at it. Now, when you're talking about something else, like I mentioned, athletic gear is one of those things that it'd be cool to show it in action. Show people running, show people at the gym, show your product, let people know, okay, this is what it does, this is how you can use it. And that's how I would approach it.
What are some other tips in terms of creating your actual content that you can recommend to people? We talked about, the user is scrolling through and they may only see it for like 2 or 3 seconds. So if they can't understand what it is in those first 2 or 3 seconds, chances are, like you said,
right,
they're not going to pay attention to it. So are there any other tips or tricks that you would recommend in terms of the actual content creation of itself?
Yeah. So
I think for most people that could probably be the hardest part of the advertising campaign because, they don't have someone, maybe they don't have that skill set or they don't have someone on staff that they think can create a good enough content piece.
Okay, so the first thing that I would focus on is a strong call to action. I think that's the first place to start. So you want to make sure that whatever content that you're using has that call to action. Are you selling a product and you have a discount? Make sure that's known. Are you trying to do a brand awareness campaign? Okay, are you just trying to teach people what you do, what your product is? Are you trying to get clicks to the website? I would say start there, okay? Start with what's the function of the campaign. And then when you start developing the actual creative, the video, the flyer, the image, whatever it is, make it engaging and test. There is no right or wrong, so you have to test. You're going to have to add multiple forms of creative. Look at each ad and how it'll break down how each ad performs. How many views, how many clicks from that specific ad. And then you can really say, okay, well, I saw that on the standalone flyer that I did, my clicks weren't that high, but when I did the video, people love that. So that's what I would say is test different things, strong call to actions, make things vibrant, make things fun, engaging.
Is there a certain amount of time that you would suggest people change that content out? So let's say they run a campaign, they run it for a month or two, and it starts off great, but then obviously in any sales and marketing, right, it might start to fall down a little bit because you've shown that same message to your target audience multiple times. Is there maybe like 2 months, 3 months, a month, a week? Like, what's your recommended time?
My recommended time would be based on your metrics. I would pay attention to your cost per click and your frequency rate. And those two will give you an idea of when you should change out your creative or change your campaign. Because let's say your frequency is really high. That's saying that the same people are getting your ad multiple times. And if they're not checking out or if they haven't checked out, chances are you may want to move on and find a new consumer depending on the length of the period that you've been running your ad. Now on the cost per click, let's just say you started and it was at 50 cents. If you notice that cost per click starts going higher and higher and higher, then you may want to reevaluate your campaign, your creative, and say, okay, we did good at first, but now things are going up instead of down, which is what you want. So maybe time for changing things out.
I've heard you say it multiple times now, is cost per click one of the what I would call more important numbers to actually pay attention to?
Yeah, and absolutely. It goes back to your campaign and what you're trying to achieve. Like I said before, they have different functions. So you have brand awareness campaigns, you have clicks when you're just trying to get clicks to your website, you have conversions, you have form fills, you have a lot of opportunities. So paying attention to the measurable goal in your campaign is going to be key to decide, where you go next and if the ROI makes sense and things like that. So when we talked last time about event marketing, paying attention to things like your click-through rate or your conversion rate. If you're doing either a campaign that goes from Facebook to your website, or if you're running a direct campaign for a product that you're selling, you can pay attention to those different things.
So obviously, if someone's trying to maybe just get people to fill out a form to attend a webinar versus
Right.
a company that's specifically sending someone to their website to actually sell sports athletics, wear in your case, obviously they're going to have different measurements and different data that they should be looking at.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid by the difference, because conversions are always going to cost more money in terms of cost per action. That's going to be your higher dollar amounts. But things like click-through rates you'll get for cents. So it just depends on what you do. So don't be scared away by, oh, my conversion is at $10 per person rather than my click-through rate is 25 cents. It's a big difference. It takes a lot more for a consumer to say, okay, I'm buying that product, made my decision, rather than I'll go check it out. I'll give them a chance to look at their website. Which leads me to another point. We had mentioned form fills. Form fills are great because what Facebook does really well is they do a great job at helping you complete that sales funnel. So when you have a consumer that goes to your website and they didn't check out, let's say, but they've been going often, that may be that they're in that purchasing cycle. They're looking for something that you're providing, but maybe there's that little thing that hasn't made them pull the trigger yet. Maybe it's price, maybe it's competition, whatever it may be. You can collect all that data, all that, basically the people who have been visiting your website, retarget them via Facebook ads. If you do retargeting campaigns, you can collect those forms, and let's just say you have a spot for phone number, you have a spot for email. You can collect all that information.
Get them on your newsletter.
Yes, and then you can get them back into that cycle of maybe buying another product. If they've purchased before, you can take that email and send them ads. I mean, the opportunities are endless. So you want to build a structure. You want to have a system of, okay, some ads are for lead generating, some are for retargeting, some are for bringing back past consumers, some are specifically just for the cold approach, getting new people who've never engaged with your content before. So there's so much opportunity.
So I would say, I guess a lot of people are looking at it face value saying, I'm only going to get my message shown to one person one time. That's totally
not true.
Wrong. Correct.
Right.
Yeah. We're talking about, they might see the ad 5 or 6 times, which eventually gets them to convert.
Repetition is key in any sort of marketing effort, not just Facebook ads or any type of advertising. You need repetition. Anyone who runs an ad once they're doing themselves a disservice. You're wasting money, because it takes the average consumer 7 times to process messages, remember them, remember your brand. So if you're only running your ad one time, well, that does no good. With Facebook, it's running consistently, and you can set that. But for example, let's say you have a lifetime budget of $500 and you go month to month. So from January to February, your ad is going to run consistently all the time at all hours of the day. And that's an advantage that not many other platforms have in terms of traditional and digital marketing.
Right. No, definitely. I think that plays a really strong factor. We talked about it earlier about being able to realize or come to a conclusion like, hey, I'm actually getting an ROI, my return on investment from this. Personally, I think paid social ads are one of the best to realize really quickly, like, hey, it's either working or it's not.
Correct.
Right? We talk about other channels like radio or TV or, print, where, some of the analytics might not be in real time, and you might not be able to make the decision quick enough to save some of that budget or add more to the budget, right? Because it's working. And I think honestly, that's probably, in my opinion, that's one of social media paid advertising's biggest strengths, is you're able to make that decision and then either shift and change. Maybe I market to a different audience, or hey, this is really working. Let's focus more specifically on this, and I could only be 5 days into the campaign. Let's focus more on this. Let's increase the budget. Let's get more traction going.
I agree 100%. You said it best. And that really comes down to quantifying your results. When you do something like a newspaper ad, or you do something like a radio ad, not knocking them, because it works for some markets, but it's very hard to quantify. You can't track, where that sale came from. It's essentially just an awareness campaign, because I can't tell you that if I'm selling, sunglasses, then if I run a radio ad, that all my sales are coming just because of that. Like you can't. It's just, you're taking a shot in the dark. But when
Right.
you're talking about Facebook, you can see directly where it came from and what time. And it's just, for someone who's especially on a shoestring budget, I would push Facebook and social media advertising even more, because you get to watch each penny being spent and you can say, okay, I like it going here. Well, I don't like that number, and you get control of it. But when you throw your money into a newspaper ad or a radio ad or a TV ad, you just hand over that money and you say, okay, let's hope for the best. Let's hope I get some sales from this. So, it's a challenge. You have to, but again, it goes back to your demographic. You have to look at your market. So if your consumer isn't spending a lot of time on Facebook, but you know that your consumer watches a lot of the golf channel, well, that's an area to look into. The key in all marketing and advertising is a well-rounded strategy. You got to have a well-rounded strategy no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we talked a lot about the reasoning behind it. Let's kind of take the next step further and talk more on the practical day-to-day base. So
Sure.
Are there any tips? I guess we can start with Facebook. That's probably one of the most well-known. Obviously, when we talk about social media, that's probably one of the first platforms that come to mind. Are there any like day-to-day tips that you would recommend, whether we're talking about people who have run multiple campaigns or people who maybe are just starting out for the first time, that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I would say the first tip would be not to get discouraged, because it's tricky at first. It's a hard platform. There's a lot of numbers. The dashboard's really confusing. They're always updating their rules and regulations.
The layout always changes.
The layout's always changing. And like I know any advertisers that are listening will understand this dilemma. But before, there used to be like a text limit on your images. Like Facebook would limit the amount of text on your ad. It had to be like a certain percentage, a small percentage of like your actual display, your creative, or else they wouldn't let you run it. And that rule recently changed, which is awesome. So people who like to run flyers with text on them, now you can. So I was like, oh yes, we finally got that. So it's like, don't get discouraged. There's a learning curve to it. You're going to have to play around. You're going to have to test with it and see what works and what doesn't. I would also say to have fun with it and enjoy, especially if you're a creative person, get creative, make some cool content, figure out, okay, maybe I can go shoot this cool video, or maybe I can go take some cool pictures, and don't be afraid to try new things. That's what you're going to find throughout the process, is what works and what doesn't. And I think that's a big thing to take into consideration.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about, we had mentioned it earlier about, not being too broad and not being too specific.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a sweet spot? I guess it's almost like this double-edged sword,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is there a sweet spot that you like to stay within? And obviously this might change based on what you're trying to do, and it changes on the platform, right? Because we talk about different demographics, but like what's too granular versus what's too broad in that sense?
Okay. So when it comes to that, we'll talk about a couple things. The first would be budget. So you're going to want to look at how much money you're spending first. Like, for example, if you have $500, I wouldn't recommend doing a national campaign. I wouldn't even recommend doing a statewide campaign. I would, so like that's the first factor to consider. But let's say you're in your ads manager right now. You're listening to this podcast. You're looking for like walk me through. Once you go in, okay, and you're building your ad, you go through your campaign, you go through your ad set and all of that. During that process, you're going to get to a point where it's going to ask you to upload your target or type in your targets. So this is where your research is going to come to play. If you already know that, let's just say we're going to use the athletic company again, your prime consumer is 18 to 25. That's the starting point. Okay, 18 to 25. And if you look at your past sales and you've seen, okay, well, most of my sales have come from, 55% female and the other 45% male. Like that's something to consider too. So I would look at past metrics and then plug those in. But then once you do all that, you're going to look at your audience size. And if your audience size is really low, Facebook will let you know. And they'll say, hey, this is too small. Your results may be skewed and less than average. Try increasing it. So that's one thing to look at. But I like to start with locations. So I'm working on a local campaign for a school system. And what we do is we got all of our data on where students are coming from for that specific school. How many miles do they usually drive to school? What locations are they coming from? Things like that. And then we look at like things like languages. Are they a high percentage of ESOL students? So we can run ads in Spanish or in Creole or in French, whichever language. And then we see, okay, well, what is the target size? Are we going to reach 10,000 people? Are we going to reach 5,000 people? And then that's how we can kind of determine some of those results from the campaigns. But I wouldn't go too specific. You want to stay a little bit broad. Location, age, maybe it's an income thing if you're selling like a high-end product, things like that.
Awesome. Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think that's one of the biggest concerns of, like you said, you have to know your audience, you have to know your market,
Right.
or you're going to spend the money and you're going to realize quickly, hey, this isn't working.
Yeah, and that's okay too. Like, let's say you're a startup business and you don't have any of those metrics, like that's completely fine because Facebook and social media ads in general can be used as a tool to get information. So if you're running these ads to, let's just say, the general public, maybe a few counties, and you know that you're going to be selling a product locally, you can see, okay, well, out of these ads that I've ran, these are the people that have engaged with them from these areas. So it can also be used as a starting point. So you don't have to be discouraged if you don't have a ton of metrics, because you can use the platform to get metrics on your consumer.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's a great point. Let's shift focus a little bit. I know I've heard this a lot, and I know we touched about it earlier, of video.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, everyone has an iPhone. TikTok's blown up everywhere. When it comes to video, specifically video creatives, what are some tips? What are some rules? I know different platforms say, it needs to be this size versus other platforms needs to be a different size. Do I put text on it? Should I put subtitles on all my videos? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I guess it's time we should talk about another platform.
Sure.
We've given Facebook a lot of a big plug here. So I love TikTok. I'm guilty of it. I really enjoy it. I find it to be really fun. I have that free, 10, 15 minutes during the day, and I want to, see what's going on, laugh a little bit. It's a great platform. Now, TikTok ads are very different in a way that I like, because the ads on the ads on TikTok are all content. Like, the same content that you would see from a user posting is essentially the same as what you're going to see as an ad, where on Facebook, you can usually tell very quickly that's an ad, that's an organic post. Somebody posted a picture of their family, and that's a sales pitch. On TikTok, these influencers, these creators are working with these brands, and when they do, like, for example, their dances or their funny skits or their pranks, they're working the product into it. So it says sponsored, it's a promoted post, but it looks like an actual video. So you're getting a lot more views. You're getting a lot
engagement.
Yeah, your engagement's so much higher because it's not an ad per se. I say that in quotes. It's not just like your typical salesy ad. It's fun. Like, when they're doing this dance and they have a Coca-Cola in their hand, they're watching that whole thing. Not that Coca-Cola needs it, but you get what I'm saying, that they try and incorporate it into the trends and those pranks and things like that. So I love that. I think that's really creative and fun.
How would you put Instagram into that category?
So whenever you run ads on Facebook, you can also automatically run them on Instagram. Facebook owns Instagram, so it's kind of your budget can be spent on both. You don't need more. If you have $5,000 or $500, it can be shared between Facebook and Instagram. When you had mentioned before about video and text, I do like having some text with the video, but not where it's throwing off. Does that make sense? Like, not where your eyes are specifically going straight to the text. Like, you still want it to mold with the video. So maybe
help tell the story,
Help tell the story, I guess, is the best way to say it. So maybe if you're doing a video, subtitles are great. Like, one of the people that I like to listen to a lot is Gary Vaynerchuk. He has a lot of information about business, and he has a podcast. And in almost all of his videos, as he's speaking, there's subtitles. And it's kind of just something for your eyes to follow along with as you're listening. Maybe as a reinforcement point, you have your senses, you're reading and you're listening, kind of retaining that information more. But again, it's back to trying things. It really depends on the product, and I don't want to give any wrong information. So that's why I say you have to test different things. There's things that I've done for some clients that work really, really well. And then there's things that I've done and I said, I remember that worked really good. Let's try that, and not good at all. So it's like you have to see what works best for who you're targeting and what you're selling.
Yeah. What about hashtags?
Hashtags are good. I mean, you don't really necessarily need them if you're doing ads because you're already expanding your audience. So, for example, if you're doing hashtag, you know, workout and you're sending your athletic ads to people who enjoy working out in the gym and health and fitness, you're already reaching those individuals. So even if they're searching up that hashtag for content, they're going to be getting the content anyways.
So I would say hashtags are more for that organic.
Yeah, I would use hashtags strictly for the organic, and stick to a few, just a few things that are relative to your content.
Awesome. Let's see. Sticking on that same topic of videos and stories, I hear this all the time, right? My office talks about it. We have to have a story, or we have to have, I think what is it on Instagram where they have the stories?
Like the highlights on
Right,
the page?
right. Talk a little bit about that, because I know, correct me if I'm wrong, you can do advertising differently depending on who you're trying to reach.
So on Facebook and Instagram, you have the opportunity to do story ads. And these are all things that'll be laid out in your ads manager. So you can pick your placements. Usually Facebook recommends it, but they can take your ad and do a story placement, or they can also do like a feed placement. So, you have the opportunity to do that. And usually I like stories because they're quick. So when somebody's scrolling or they're clicking through stories, it gives them the opportunity to, take a quick glance and keep moving on. And then maybe you'll catch them again on their feed. So that's just an extra reinforcement point. But I definitely would not cut out stories. I like them, especially because you have the swipe up feature. And that's an opportunity because if they're just scrolling through their stories and they see a product they may like, we're all guilty of it, you could just swipe up and, look at it. You may not buy it right then and there, but then that's your opportunity to retarget. They were interested, so they clicked.
Yeah, definitely. What would you say to someone who's unsure of how to actually structure their ad, right? So let's go back to Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to use as an example. Facebook gives you many different call to action opportunities on the ad itself, right? So we're talking about literally putting in a button to go to a website versus filling out that form like we talked about, or even if it might be like a direct call right to their business.
Right.
Maybe this kind of goes back to the overall what's your objective for the campaign. But for someone who's unsure, what's a good place for them to start?
Okay, a good place to start. Let's say you're fresh in this, you've never done it before. I would recommend splitting up your budget and trying different campaigns and different goals, so to say, different call to actions, different buttons, because you'll know what works best. So, the things like the form fills are great. Anything that's a stronger call to action is going to cost more money. So if you're asking people to spend their money to buy a product, those conversions usually cost more money than others. If you're asking somebody to take the time out of their day to fill out a form, there needs to be a strong interest. And it comes back to your percentage of the overall people that you're trying to reach. So let's say you're running an ad and your audience is 10,000 people. If your campaign is for clicks, you're going to get a lot more clicks than if you were running your ad with the goal of having conversions, just because it's an easier thing for the consumer to do. You know what I mean? It's not as hard of a process. It's not a lot of thought involved. It's just a quick, okay, click and go. But back to the forms, I just signed one up. Formula One is coming to Miami, and what they're starting to do is gauge interest. So anyone who has an interest in Formula One and cars in that location, they're starting to send ads, but you can't buy tickets yet. So what they did is they did a form fill. You swipe up, and if you signed up through the ad, you would get first notice when tickets went on sale. So I did that. And now what they've just done is they now have a list of all the consumers who are interested in Formula One that they've reached, that are also interested in going to see Formula One in Miami, that now they have access to send them ads for other events. And when tickets go on sale, they're going to have those warm leads to refilter them to. So again, back to the original point, which is trying new things. You have to think about the strategy. You have to think about what's most important to you. What do you want to spend your money on? Do you want leads? Do you want brand exposure? Do you want clicks to your website? So you can start there, and it's okay to test a little bit of money in each area to see what does best.
Perfect. So with that being said, are there any other tips that you wanted to share to our listeners today? Any other, maybe a last takeaway?
Last takeaway. I would say try out different platforms. Facebook and Instagram, they're really great and you're going to see a lot of success from them. But there's nothing wrong with trying other ones. We've been getting a lot into Snapchat ads. We've been getting a lot into TikTok ads. LinkedIn ads are great, especially if you're trying to get positions filled, like hiring. Like putting a paid budget behind those job postings is great and help expand your reach. So try new things. Like I think I said it last time because it's the truth. You have to try new things. You have to have fun with it. Get creative. So that would be my key takeaway is just, try different platforms, see what works.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Robert. If our listeners have any more questions about any of the things that we talked about here today, how can they get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, you can either email me at robert@trishleonard.com or you can call our office at 239-405-8115.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Robert.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to hopefully come back for a third time.
Third time's the charm, right?
Third time's the charm.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, make sure to click that subscribe button so you never miss another show. Join other professionals looking to grow their business with Southwest Florida Inc. at SWFLinc.com and sign up for a free membership today. Thanks so much for listening to Business Builders. We'll see you next time.